1, 2. Okei, se on tää. On tää kamera, saatana. Ottaa se tohon. Vähän lähemmäksi. Nyt on vitu radios. Jos on oot päivi. Kai mitä mä laitan. Create a new document. Cancel. Miten mä tallennan? Onko tää tallennan? Save as. Menee väärään paikkaan sitten. Onks tuo? Okei. Tähänkö mä laitan? Tonne. Ihan hyvä toi. Okei. No mitä, onks siellä vielä nyt sitten? On tyhmä kuin se. No okei. Sen. Tajusko se nyt, että ei tajunnut. Vasta. No, tässä on Kari Laine, hyvää huomenta. Tai oikeastaan, no joo, sukunimi vaihtui, kun menen naimisiin, mutta niin, miten mä lähestyn tämmöistä asiaa, kun mä olin oikeudessa ja mä olin se uhri, ja tuomari kääntää sen jutun, eli mä otin selvää, niin hän on vapaamuurari. Mä haluan tehdä tästä kantelun.
Varmaan sitten toi oikeuskanslerin virasto onnis kanteluun, niin mä käännän sinne.
Joo, kiitos. No tässä on Kari Laine, tai oikeastaan Kari Roste, hyvää huomenta.
Hei.
Mä haluan tehdä, mä olin uhrina oikeudenkäynnissä, mikä oli farssi, eli musta tehtiin syyllinen, eli mut hakattiin ison porukan toimesta. Ja niin mä en saanut mitään oikeutta, ja sitten mä rupesin ihmettelemään sitä, otin selvää, niin tämä tuomari on tämmönen tuossa Lohjalla kuin Juuso Lehtinen, käräjätuomari, niin hän on vapaamuurari ja ottaa silloin käskyjä muualta. Mä haluan tehdä semmoisen, että Juuso Lehtisen tämä vapaamuurariushomma tutkitaan.
Joo, jos te haluatte tehdä siitä kantelun, niin se pitää tehdä meille kirjallisena.
Asia selvä. Mihin osoitteeseen mä sen lähetän?
Haluatteko lähettää sähköisenä vai kirjallisena?
Voiko se lähettää sähköpostilla?
Joo, se sähköposti on sellainen kuin kirjaamo@okv.fi.
Eli kirjaamo ja OK, vai?
OKV.
OKV. Ootas mä kirjoitan sen ylös. Se menee varmasti oikein. Kirjaamo @ okv.fi. Hyvä.
Kyllä.
Meneekö se sitten valtakunnan syytteelle vai kuka sitä rupeaa käsittelemään?
Se menee täällä meillä jollekin meidän esittelijöistä käsittelyyn ja hän sitten kenelle meneekään, niin katsoo sitten, että mitä toimenpiteitä.
Joo, kato, kun kaikkein helpointahan olisi vaan mennä ja hakata se jätkä, mutta niin se ei taida ihan laillista vai? Vai onko se laillista?
Joo,
Mä tekis mieli mennä vetää ympäri korvia sitä.
joo, kyllä, ymmärrän.
Joo. Tää koko Suomen, laita sinne ylös, kun mä tiedän, että nauhoitetaan kaikki puhelut, niin mä nyt tähän laitan ylös. Tää koko Suomen oikeusjärjestelmä on ihan naurettavassa tilassa. Ja mä tuun niin käymään sen kimppuun. Ja mun nimi on tosiaan Kari Laine, siis oli nykyinen nimi Kari Rusteen. Ja mä aion niin kääntää joka vitun kive. Kiitos sulle. Näkemiin.
Kiitos.
Vitu, ihan homo. Satana homo. Satana homot. Vitu, vittu. Okei. Eli nyt rupeaa näyttää siltä, että mun on otettava oikeus omiin käsiin. Ei vielä. Ei ihan vielä. Vähän myöhemmin mä otan oikeuden omiin käsiin. Vastaanotto. Okei. Okei. Katsotaan nyt se yksi juttu. Ei se ole tämä. Ei tämä. Missä se on? Voistas. Onko se tässä? Ei. Ei. Eikö oliko se toi? Oh.
All governments and religions. But his warnings were ignored, exactly as our American people have been ignoring all warnings about the United Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. Now here is something that will stun and very likely outrage many who hear this. But there is documentary proof that our own Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton became students of Weishaupt. Jefferson was one of Weishaupt's strongest defenders when he was outlawed by his government. And it was Jefferson who infiltrated the Illuminati into the then newly organized lodges of the Scottish Rite in New England. Here is the proof. In 1789, John Robeson warned all Masonic leaders in America that the Illuminati...
Mä otin tämän mielestäni jonnekin. Tossa se on. Okei. Taas se PDF. Joko se... Vitu hidasta. Sitä nyt varoiksi, että alteesta taitaa olla. Jos ei on, nyt se on. Okei, tää on hyvä. Mikäs tää on?
There's more than just one Area 51, and they exist in places you won't believe is possible. This is an article by Arjun Walia, dated June 30th. He says, it's ironic that the US would begin a devastating war, allegedly in search of weapons of mass destruction, when the most worrisome developments in this field are occurring in your own backyard. It's ironic that the US should be fighting monstrously expensive wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere allegedly to bring democracy to those countries, when it itself can no longer claim to be called a democracy, when trillions, and I mean thousands of billions of dollars, have been spent on projects about which both the Congress and the Commander-in-Chief have been kept deliberately in the dark. This is a quote by Paul Hellyer, former Canadian Defense Minister. He came out with alien disclosure a few years back, and he's doing that continuously up to today. It was only 3 years ago, in 2013, that the Central Intelligence Agency finally admitted to the existence of Area 51. Although it didn't officially exist before the CIA made this admission, it was pretty clear that something secretive was going on in the Nevada desert. That secretive something would be the testing of secret aircraft and technology that the public has absolutely no idea about. Take, for example, the US airstrike against Libya in 1996. An F-111 jet was used, which had been operating since 1983, but its existence was still kept secret for a number of years after that. These programs are referred to as Special Access Programs, SAPs, and they're funded from what's known as the Black Budget. From these we have acknowledged and saved SAPs, Special Access Programs. These programs do not exist publicly, but they do indeed exist. They're better known as Deep Black Programs. A 1997 US Senate reported them as so sensitive that they are exempt from standard reporting requirements to the Congress. It's also important to mention that the United States has a history of government agencies existing in secret. The National Security Agency, the NSA, was founded in 1952, but its existence was hidden until the mid-1960s. Even more secretive is the National Reconnaissance Office, which was founded in 1960, but remained completely concealed for 30 years. Underocean and in-bottom military bases also exist. Research into the discussions of underocean, if you hear that squeaking in the background, it's nighttime here in Athens, and that's a little teat owl. It's flying around. It usually likes to perch itself on top of my pine trees. And it goes around, the owls go around hunting every night, so it's screeching. There it goes. Sorry about that. Okay, let's go back to the article. Underocean and in-bottom military bases. Research into discussions of underocean and in-bottom military bases began decades ago. For example, in 1968, the Stanford Research Institute discussed the construction of dozens of undersea bases. The study was titled Feasibility of Manned In-Bottom Bases. It's important to show you the abstract here because it clearly reveals that the military-industrial complex was considering and what they could do within their technological research and reach at the time. That was more than 4 decades ago. I obtained these abstracts from the source listed below if you'd like to see for yourself. The abstract says, the construction of 30 manned in-bottom bases within the ocean floors is technically and economically feasible. However, it would be necessary to establish some successive types of experimental facilities before a full construction program can be started. This could take 15 years. The major technology for land-linked station in-bottom is established now. Only adaptations are needed. The remaining experimental phases will require further development of equipment and techniques applicable to remote sea access. There are useful assignments for a succession of 3 experimental stations other than advancing in-bottom construction techniques. Science and engineering concerned with the oceans and the resources will be furthered, and military tests of undersea base functions complementing deeper operations can be accomplished. The cost of the experimental phase, called here a demonstration program, can be surprisingly modest, approximately $1.5 billion spent over 15 years. The distinction between in-bottom bases and on-bottom facilities is made in the number of men enclosed. In the depth of water, wherein areas of 1 atmosphere space can be created in-bottom, and on-bottom facilities is made in the number of men enclosed in the depth of water, wherein areas of 1 atmosphere space can be created in bottom. At such low cost, the ingress system can be amortized if the space required is reasonably large. Economics thus can dictate choice between the 2 types. Even so, some on-bottom facilities will be needed to aid the construction of remote in-bottom facilities. Presently, establishing an in-bottom facility and building upon this will present fewer technical difficulties than do the submersibles which would support it and use it. Subsequent to the completion of the 3rd phase of the demonstration program, which would be a remote deep water station, and the evaluation of it, a multiple base program could be implemented. The cost of such a base program would be about $2.7 billion for construction of a number of bases. We assumed at 30. So do these bases exist today without question? I think they do, just like Area 51 existed without question. In 1987, Deputy Director of Engineering and Construction of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Lloyd Dusha, gave a speech at an engineering conference titled Underground Facilities for Defense, Experience and Lessons. In the first paragraph of his speech, he states the following. After World War II, political and economic factors changed the underground construction picture and caused a renewed interest to think underground. As a result of this interest, the Corps of Engineers became involved in the design and construction of some very complex and interesting military projects. Although the conference program indicates the topic to be underground facilities for defense, experience and lessons, I must deviate a little because several of the most interesting facilities that have been designed and constructed by the Corps are classified. This is by Lloyd Dusha, Underground Facilities for Defense, Experience and Lessons, in Tunneling and Underground Transport, Future Developments in Technology, Economics and Policy, edition F.P. Davidson, New York, 1987, pages 109 to 113. This was in 1969, but let's keep in mind that the abstract above is from 1968, meaning that these constructions could have been under development before or shortly after that publication. Now, what do these facilities look like? Walter Kirshner, who was an illustrator for the United States Navy's rock site team during the 1960s, contacted Richard Soder, PhD, who has researched this topic extensively. This was at the time when the Navy had plans for technical complex and very large buried manned bases beneath the ocean floor. His background is verified. Documents like this, or a single Google search for Waters' name alongside US Navy or US Navy Illustrator would suffice. He contacted Dr. Soder to provide him with some of the original illustrations he'd done for this project, and they are very telling. Dr. Soder, in his book, Hidden in Plain Sight, provides these illustrations and goes on into detailing regarding the science and engineering behind these projects. It's quite fascinating, and I recommend you check him out if you are interested in learning more. Here is an excerpt and picture from the book. This racetrack facility is also called the Nautilus concept, that can dock 3 submarines at a time, with an adjoining sister facility that also can handle multiple submarines. The picture is virtually self-explanatory. Large submarines are hundreds of feet long, so the dimensions of the facilities shown are here would have been very large, and the central docking area might be more than 1,000 feet long and easily more than 100 feet in diameter. The living quarters would obviously have to accommodate hundreds of crew members in some degree of creature comfort. The book has many other illustrations, but unfortunately I cannot seem to find any more online. It doesn't end with Area 51. There are also known underground facilities in existence. Take, for example, the Swedish underground military facility at Musko, M-U-S-K-O, Musko. It's a large naval base built underneath a mountain. The hospital alone with its facility holds over 1,000 beds. Musko engineers blasted out 1,500,000 cubic meters of stone in order to build it. The world's most prominent researcher on underground military facilities, in my opinion, PhD Richard Soder, told of an interesting story in his book, Hidden in Plain Sight, that I'd like to share with you here. As it happens, after giving a public talk a couple of years ago, I was approached by a man who had been a uniformed member of the United States Navy. We chatted for a while, and when he mentioned that he had spent some time at China Lake, my ears perked up. I asked him if there was an underground facility at China Lake. He said that indeed there is, and that it is impressively large and deep. I asked him if he had been in it ever, and he said that he had, though not to the deepest levels. I asked him how deep the deepest part extended. He looked at me soberly and said very quietly, "It goes 1 mile deep." I then asked him what the underground base contains. He replied, "Weapons." I responded, "What sort of weaponry?" And he answered without pausing, "Weapons more powerful than nuclear weapons." There are documents available which expose a deep underground command center that has to be built far below regions such as Washington, D.C. and China Lake, California during the Cold War. Documents show that in 1964, the military was considering building a huge underground cavity 4,000 feet deep beneath China Lake. And it's well known to the United States and the Soviet Union created a vast infrastructure to support a complex of offensive and defensive weapons during the Cold War. This infrastructure included sites and facilities for developing, testing, storing, and manufacturing weapons. There was also a host of communication and command centers. The very first top-secret memo on the subject was issued by Robert McNamara, November 7, 1963, from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. A second memo was issued on the same day concerning a proposed deep underground national command center. These are the deep underground bases, dumb bases, that would be approximately 3,500 feet beneath Washington. The memo also mentioned elevator shafts below the State Department and White House that would descend 3,500 feet with very high speed, horizontal tunnel transport to the main facility, and this was way back in the 1960s. Imagine what technological feats we are capable of now that we have even more advanced technology. A world of transparency is required if our race is to evolve out of our infancy, and maybe one day everything will come to light. This is an article by Snowden Reveals First Ever Public Disclosure of Secret Black Budget Programs. The source is Richard Soder, Hidden in Plain Sight, Beyond the X-Files, Keyhole Publishing Company, March 2010. I'll leave a link below for you for this.
Today we have Elon Musk. Elon, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to spend the time today talking about your view of the future and what people should work on. So to start off, could you tell us, you famously said when you were younger there were 5 problems that you thought were most important for you to work on. If you were 22 today, what would the 5 problems that you would think about working on be?
Well, first of all, I think if somebody is doing something that is useful to the rest of society, I think that's a good thing. Like, it doesn't have to change the world. Like, you know, if you're doing something that has high value to people, and frankly, even if it's something, if it's like just a little game, or, you know, some improvement in photo sharing or something, if it has a small amount of good for a large number of people, that's, I mean, I think that's fine. Like, stuff doesn't need to be changed the world just to be good. But you know, in terms of things that I think are most likely to affect the future of humanity, I think AI is probably the single biggest item in the near term that's likely to affect humanity. So it's very important that we have the advent of AI in a good way. That is something that if you could look into the crystal ball and see the future, you would like that outcome, because it is something that could go wrong, as we've talked about many times, and so we really need to make sure it goes right. That's I think AI, working on AI and making sure it's a great future. That's the most important thing I think right now, the most pressing item. Then obviously anything to do with genetics. If you can actually solve genetic diseases, if you can prevent dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that, with genetic reprogramming, that would be wonderful. So I think this genetics, it might be the sort of second most important item. I think having a high bandwidth interface to the brain, like we're currently bandwidth limited. We have a digital tertiary self in the form of our email capabilities, our computers, phones, applications. We're effectively superhuman, but we are extremely bandwidth constrained in that interface between the cortex and your sort of that tertiary digital form of yourself, and helping.
It's been a testing summer of weather so far for many Europeans. The heat wave sweeping across parts of Europe, nicknamed Lucifer, is expected to affect Greece with vengeance next, with temperatures rising as high as 41 degrees. High temperatures across Italy over the past weeks have already taken their toll on the country's glaciers, with a summer ski resort in the Stelvio Pass having to make the historic decision to suspend its activities due to worsening conditions. But after the sun came the rains across northern Italy over the weekend. Several people died in freak accidents, including a woman whose car was buried by a landslide, 2 men were killed by falling trees, and 1 from a lightning strike. The aftermath of the heatwave also proved a problem for Austria, with very bad storms across the country causing widespread flooding and landslides with knock-on effects on the roads and public transport. Clean-up operations have been underway ever since.
After the heat wave in parts of Europe came the storms and casualties. 4 people were reported dead in northern Italy over the weekend as the weather turned violent. First, a mudslide near the ski resort of Cortina d'Ampezzo swept a woman to her death on Saturday. On Sunday, 3 men were killed, 2 of them when strong winds brought down trees, the other by lightning. Clean-up operations have been underway in Austria after heavy rain. The Grossarital Valley in the state of Salzburg was again reported to be...
University of California, Berkeley, suggests climate, particularly temperature, has a significant influence on suicide rates in developing countries. Carlton published their findings July 31st in the Journal of Proceedings of the National Academy.
Mutual military deployment and exchange. Turkey's military presence is not welcomed by Saudi Arabia, UAE and Bahrain. They want Turkey to close down its base in Qatar, along with 12 other demands that Qatar calls a violation of its sovereignty. Turkey, on the other hand, is looking to build a more permanent presence here, including its army, navy and air force. A Turkish military source has told Al Jazeera that a combined military base is being built in Qatar. Turkey plans to have a brigade-level force, which means a few thousand soldiers. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan discussed defense cooperation during his recent shuttle diplomacy tour of the Middle East.
Despite broad support for same-sex marriage among Australians, successive governments have failed to pass legislation due to opposition from conservative politicians. Human embryos have been successfully edited by U.S. scientists to remove faulty DNA that causes hereditary heart disease. The groundbreaking experiment was first reported by MIT Technology Review and expounded on in a paper published.
This crisis is something analysts say could have been avoided.
It should have gone at a very high state level. President Kenyatta could have called President Peña Nieto in Mexico, bought whatever they needed, packaged it at sea, and then dumped it.
A congregation member saw a pickup truck speed away from the parking lot after the explosion.
You don't need a crystal ball to see World War III coming. Neither does Putin. With years of warnings and his pleas for a U.S.-Russia partnership ignored, Putin created the Ivanov Doctrine, allowing for a defensive first use of nukes. The key concept is de-escalation of aggression, forcing the enemy to halt military action by the threat of a first strike. But neocon Jews who sent the Goys off to war, like Cohen, Edelman, and Kristol, urge the big stick, thinking it's a big secret. Ha!
It seemed like there's a crisis and they handled it competently. You could agree or disagree. Do they have a long-term strategy? Who knows? But in terms of just the execution of this 372 hours, meetings, diplomacy and military stuff coordinated, keeping it secret, you know, that was impressive. So that reassures you. If you think the Trump White House so far has been a little bit of a chaotic place, you feel like, gee, H.R. McMaster has the national security side of it under control.
He means the Jews have it under control. McMaster's just a pawn of the Jewish lobby and the Jewish-owned Fed that cuts his paycheck. Who is so senseless not to know that U.S. policy revolves around what's good for the Jews? And with Russia wrecking their scheme for regime change in Syria, they've cooked up a new enemy, the Putin regime. No surprise that NATO, America's global army, is amassing troops on Russia's borders.
Вот кольцо. И мне кажется, что наша страна оказывается в этом кольце. Я лично чувствую какие-то вот удушающие, у меня такое удушающее ощущение, что кто-то меня душит. Мне кажется, что это НАТО.
Мы с нами всех задушим. Что вы так боитесь? Ну,
And with his black belt on, Putin's primed and ready.
Но угрозы нет, а система ПРО продолжает строиться. Значит, мы были правы, когда говорили, что нас обманывают. С нами не искренне.
What else is new?
Вам должно быть известно, что ракеты эти закладываются в капсулу, которая используется для пусков ракет средней дальности «Томагавк» морского базирования. Значит, туда закладывают сейчас антиракеты, способные поражать цели на расстоянии 500 километров. Но мы знаем, технологии развиваются. Мы примерно знаем, в каком году примерно американцы получат новую ракету, которая будет уже не 500 километров, а 1000, а потом больше. И с этого момента они начнут угрожать нашему ядерному потенциалу. Мы по годам знаем, что будет происходить. И они знают, что мы знаем. Это вам только вешают лапшу.
But the neocon Jews think that a first strike on Russia will disable its avenging missiles. Better think again.
А вы, в свою очередь, вешаете своему населению. И люди не чувствуют опасности. Вот меня что беспокоит. Ну как мы не можем понять?
What worries me is that the media is owned by Jews, and we know how they deal with facts.
Оборонного потенциала, не наступательного. Это, значит, системы, которые призваны оградить от агрессии. Это неправда, это не так. Стратегическая система противоракетной обороны – это часть наступательного стратегического потенциала. И все это работает в единой связке с наступательными ударными комплексами. Одни прикрывают, одни наносят упреждающий удар высокоточным оружием, другие прикрывают от ядерного ответного удара, третьи, значит, наносят сами ядерный удар. Это все в комплексе решается.
Like the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Putin recently told his Security Council that Russia is now forced to neutralize the emerging threat. And Romania and Poland will get caught in the nuclear rain.
Работа абсолютно незаметна. До Румынии никто не будет знать, что там происходит. И что допускают румын туда, что ли? Никто не будет знать, ни румыны не будут знать, ни поляки не будут знать. Я знаю, как это делается.
He was on the NATO long before Lieberman spilled the beans.
When the president turned over leadership to NATO, in one sense that was exactly the right thing to do, because we can't fight every good fight in the world alone. We need our allies. I appreciate that they've come in. But we're the heart of NATO, and it's not as exactly as if we took the ball and gave it to NATO. We're still NATO.
Vomit it out, Lieberman, just like your global army NATO is now doing, regurgitating its troops on Russia's borders.
Развязать самую жестокую, кровавую войну, поработить, поставить на службу своим смертоносным целям почти все европейские страны. На Советский Союз нацисты обрушили самые мощные удары. Но нет, не было и не будет силы, которая могла бы покорить наш народ.
Listen up, Crystal, Cullen, and Edelman. The future belongs to Russia. Your empire has no clothes. Here we go again. Jumerica needs a demon to hate 1,000 miles away. And Bill O'Reilly's nation from Gaddafi are now swimming in rafts to Italy.